Mexico, and its history of race, culture, and present controversial topics by Group 10. Mexico is a land rich with cultural history. The colonization of Mexico started in the early 1500s. Over the course of the next 150 years, the Indian population was heavily reduced due to fighting, diseases, and the destructive nature of colonization.
By 1810, there were about 6 million inhabitants in what was called New Spain. About 1 million of those were Spanish-born. About 3.5 million were indigenous Mexicans, and the rest, which was about 1.5 million, were mestizos, who were mixed Spanish and Indian blood.
The social system also consisted of many other denominations. There were criollos, who were colonial-born whites, mulattoes, who were mixed blood of Spanish and Negro, Indians, who were the natives, and Negros, who were African slaves.
The Spanish colony of Mexico had a caste system that separated everybody into classes. The class system determined what each person could do in society depending on how high they were in the system. The caste system was separated into 3 main categories, which was then separated into 16 smaller, more racist categories. The main classes that everybody was separated into were peninsulares, who were the Europeans, mestizos, and native Indians.
By 1810, the inhabitants of Mexico grew tired of the Spanish ruling them, and so they fought for their independence. Mexico's war for independence was fought for by Mexican-born Spaniards, mestizos, and Amerindians, and Mexico gained their independence in 1821.
Soon after Mexico gained independence from Spain and the new caste system was installed, citizens began to develop their own culture. The culture was named machismo, and it revolved around masculinity being more superior to femininity. Therefore, women were discriminated in society.
Partly in due to the culture of machismo and the government of the time, the Mexican Revolution occurred in 1910. The Civil War took place to get rid of the established order in the country. The Mexican Revolution has been considered one of the most important socio-political events in Mexico's history.
In more recent times, there has been the Zapatista movement, a movement for the lower classes of Mexico. It was partly influenced by the Mexican Revolution and by the low-class struggles of the indigenous people.
The Zapatista movement began in Chiapas, Mexico, one of the poorest states in the country. It was made up of indigenous people, the lowest group in Mexico, who made up 40% of the Chiapas population.
The Zapatista movement was named after Emiliano Zapata, the revolutionary figure for the peasants in 1910. The Zapatistas lived by his words, quote unquote, "It is better to die on your feet than to live on your knees." The Zapatista movement came to fruition when they attacked San Cristobal and many other cities in Chiapas during 1994 in response to the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Today, their leader, Subcomandante Marcos, remarks on their current social status. "We have to make sure of our place in society as indigenous Indians that we have won. In Mexico, there are movements, there are revolutions and change, but for the indigenous, nothing changes." The Zapatista movement's main goals are to acquire fraud-free elections and to protest against NAFTA in fear that they, as the lowest class, would bear the brunt of the agreement. The Zapatistas embody the social system in Mexico and the issues with poverty and underrepresentation that the lower classes deal with.
The Zapatista movement was heavily influenced by the machismo culture in Mexico. The lower class revolts are in relation to how women are inferior in the machismo culture. 60% of women in Mexico have suffered some form of violence inflicted from their spouse.
Yet hardly any women report these beatings or prosecute their husbands. The president of the Commission on Fairness and Gender in Mexico's lower house of Congress, Marisela Contreras, questions why women tend to act this way. Quote unquote, "Are you going to forgive your husband?" she asked a local woman who wanted to remain anonymous. The woman responded by saying, quote unquote, "It's the culture, and some of these men are abusers themselves. Therefore, they look for a way to justify these actions." Machismo culture is influencing women to almost let abusers abuse them with no report.
The justice for women's superiority and rights in machismo culture is a very controversial topic in Mexico at the moment. Another trending subject that is quite controversial is the legalization of gay marriage in Mexico City and Mexico itself.
Mexico got its ideas of the treatment and fairness of homosexuality from the Napoleonic Code, in which France imposed on Mexico when it briefly controlled the country in the middle of the 19th century. From then on, France enforced that they should decriminalize homosexuality. Gays were discriminated, and it was against the laws to marry the same sex.
The Catholic Church in Mexico believed that marriage was a holy sacrament between a man and a woman only. As the demand for gay marriage from the citizens became stronger, the church began to tell Catholics not to vote for political parties that support legal abortion or gay marriage.
According to the Christian Bible's book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 24, quote-unquote, "A man leaves his father and his mother and cleaves to his wife, and they become one flesh." Catholicism only encourages men and women to marry each other. If they don't, then they will not be welcome as a Catholic to the church.
Marriage is currently defined as a union of a man and a woman, according to non-homosexual states. Fortunately, more and more countries are legalizing gay marriage and freedom to marry whoever he or she desires. For example, the Catholic Church in Mexico is now allowing same-sex marriage.
Felipe Calderon, president of Mexico City, was not in favor of same-sex marriage. He and the National Action Party wanted to challenge same-sex marriage, but it backfired. Mexico City is a liberal state, and most people are accepting towards the LGBTQ community. The law for same-sex marriage was passed on December 21st, 2009, but it wasn't until March 4th, 2010, when it was put into effect.
The citizens in Mexico City, such as Justice Arturo Zaldivar, feel strongly about same-sex marriage. Quote-unquote, "There is nothing that indicates that homosexual couples are less apt parents than heterosexual ones." What he is meaning to say is that no homosexual parents are any worse than heterosexual parents.
Mexico City was the first city in Latin America to legalize same-sex marriage. This change allowed homosexuals more freedom and rights. President Calderon, during the holiday season, focused more on same-sex marriage instead of the goodwill of the holidays. A lesbian couple that lives in Mexico City, Angela Alfarache and Ivan Cervantes, want, quote-unquote, society to change its ship that says there is only one kind of family, meaning that all couples should be able to live freely with their families.
The pro-gay marriage citizens in Mexico City will benefit from Josefina Vázquez Monta, the first woman running for president in Mexico. Josefina is stereotyped against for being a woman, and many people in machismo culture refuse to vote for her. She realizes the main conflicts in Mexico, and Josefina knows how to resolve them. Quote unquote, "We believe it's time to give a lot more importance to policy. The policies have always been there, but we should give them much more notice." She is a strong leader and is trying to eliminate women's inferiority in machismo culture, and is aiding the legalization of gay marriage by enforcing policies far more than Mexico has in the past.
Mexico is a land with rich history, and it still continues to grow today. Thank you for listening to our presentation.